get started here. You want to go down the list and there was some personal introduction, so go ahead and introduce yourselves and we'll come back around and talk about that.
I'm going to see you first. Hey, guys, my name is Olaoluwa Osuntokun for Speed. We're my own other Bitcoin stuff, working on Lightning for a while now.
Hi, my name is Tadge. Also working on Lightning for a while now. I just started at this new company, Lightspark, which is hopefully going to do lots of cool Lightning stuff. I also worked on like discrete block contracts and UTXO and lots of fun stuff on Bitcoin for a while.
Hi, my name is Greg, also known as Instagibbs. I was the prodigal son. I came back to Blockstream to work on a recipe for Pro Lightning, and I'm working on a prospective L2 implementation as well as focusing on fixing them and paying along with other contributors.
Hey, I'm Valentine. I'm with Spiral, working on the Lightning Dev Kit project. So, yeah, I've also been in Lightning for a bit.
Hi, I'm Bastien Teinturier, working at Async for Lightning specification and implementation expert.
Great, I'm Paul, I'm moderating the panel. And most of it's just going to be chatting about Lightning, and I thought we would organize it in a couple ways. It's just starting first with what's coming earliest, and then move our way to the further things down the road. So, just myself personally in Lightning, I often get confused with the first question I ask is, that sounds awesome. Can we do that now? And oftentimes it's, no, we have something else we need to do. So if everyone else shares in that confusion, then hopefully we can kind of type sequence it out and start there. And then the other category I would say is kind of offense or defense. Lightning is clearly a good tool for bringing in people into Bitcoin that don't have the technical or desire to operate on layer one, and so we're reaching more people. So offense would be reaching more people, and defense would be kind of protecting the Lightning Network, channel jamming, those kind of topics. So maybe if we kind of categorize it that way in a little structure, so that it's not word salad for word salad, word testing, word salad would be. Does that sound good? So maybe we'll go down and everyone is working on a specific project. So if you could pick the one that is going to see the light of day earliest, that'd be awesome.
Okay, so first of all, don't worry, we also have this issue of not knowing what's coming next. I'm notoriously known by thinking that I would get my trampoline proposal integrated in 2019, and it's still not there, but I am making a bet that it's going to come in 2023, so that is going to be hard again, but I'm trying, we'll see.
Can you give us a little bit about trampoline route and describe it?
Alright, it's a very simple proposal where actually, right now, Lightning is source routing, meaning that the sender decides how a payment goes through the network by choosing every hop, and trampoline routing is a way to somehow relax that by adding another layer of and it's using another encryption for each of the hops. And trampoline routing is adding another layer where you choose part of the route, and then these parts of the route will figure out how to connect to the next guy and how to do a route to the next guy. So it's somewhat relaxing the way we do routing in Lightning, to make it easier for nodes that don't sync as often as others the whole network to find a route and find a way to get to their destination. So I'm excited about that, and one of the ones that should come hopefully faster is blinded paths, which is a way to get back receiver privacy in Lightning. So hopefully you will get that soon.
Nice. Yeah, I guess the project that I've been kind of focused on recently is the async payments case. And that kind of solves the problem where right now in Lightning, if you're a mobile non-custodial receiver, you have to have the app like open and in the foreground to receive a payment. But in the short term, I think there's a few steps that are going to be needed to enable that. To Paul's point, it's a little bit of a ways off. And in the short term, that means focusing on offers and also integrating at least part of trampoline, probably all of it. So yeah, all of it for sure.
It's something.
Yeah, apparently it's not hard, so.
I don't have a mic, but then I can
It's
ask
coming,
you the question.
right here.
No, it's okay, I can hear you out. So, we're particularly interested in async payments. I think a lot of people are. Can we, any interest in async payments? Is this Matt Corrala's proposal implementation, or is there multiple attempts at this? Okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
Do you mind describing a little bit?
So at a high level, the basic idea is it relies on LSPs on both sides, and The idea is the sender on their non-custodial mobile wallet will send the HTLC to their LSP, and the sender's LSP will tell the receiver's LSP, like, hey, let me know when the receiver's back online with an onion message. So the receiver comes back online, the onion message gets sent to the sender's LSP, and the sender's LSP releases the payment. So that does involve a long CLTV timeout on the HTLC that the sender's LSP is holding on to, but that's fine because it doesn't tie up network liquidity. The only liquidity tied up is the sender's, and they already said goodbye to those funds anyway. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. Yeah, I think it'll be a game changer for the UX.
Awesome.
Well, unfortunately, I'm a little more speculative. So the L2, again, it's kind of two components. There's the consensus component and the memorable policy component. L2 is even more susceptible to the current downfalls of memorable policy for Lightning today. So it really motivated me to reach out with people and see what's out there, how can we fix this, and there's a lot of smart people working on that. I'm hopefully contributing to that as well.
Can you speak to a little bit about L2 benefits?
Yeah, so L2 would be, it's not possible in Bitcoin today. You would need a slightly different signature hash algorithm, which blinds itself when you sign a transaction. Instead of signing the previous output, like the address of what coin you're spending, so to speak, you basically blind it to that, so that you can reattach signatures, you can intentionally replay your signatures in a smart way. And this would allow symmetrical state channels, as well as constant space nodes, constant space watchtowers, things like this. So instead of having to hold all this toxic data around, or potentially holding toxic data around old commitment transactions, and then also holding all the HTLCs you've ever seen before, you can just toss these away. Remember the latest thing you signed to, or latest and the next thing you're waiting to confirm, basically constant. And then you can toss all that data and hand it off to the watchtower, and you're not afraid of getting, that's the other thing. You also lose the penalty mechanism, but I think there's arguments about incentives there where you can have, that's kind of out of scope, I think.
Gotcha.
So that involves like BIP 118 would be kind of the natural candidate I've implemented, assuming that seems to work out. But there's other proposals out there too, lots of ones. But the other piece is the mempool piece, which again is like, because you have this symmetrical state, it just seems you're much more likely to lose the mempool race, which you're not, we shouldn't be designing that we win mempool races. We should be designing that given proper fee incentives, and when I would pick up your RBF, whatever that was, right?
So the footprint of the node here without having to store all that data is tiny small.
Yeah.
Very
So
interesting.
we could have multiple watchtowers, and design basically like keyless watchtowers, things like that. So,
Get to work.
but that's, yeah.
Sure, I think what I'm sort of looking at, I hadn't really worked on it for a few years looking back. Most private payments fail, and usually for kind of dumb reasons, like where you're sending out HTLCs and it fails, and like your node retries and eventually it gets it, but sometimes it doesn't. And so for some use cases it's like fine, and then there's other use cases people have where it's like I want some nines, right? Maybe like a 9 or like 2 or 3 or 4, but like usually we don't really even have one.
It means like reliability.
Yeah, like like 5 nines or whatever. But like 1 is at least a place to start. And I worry that we're already sort of seeing people sort of use already established channels like outside of the rest of the network, or like, okay, I know I have these channels and that's gonna go through and that's gonna be more reliable. Or what also people are doing is like probing, and so it's like you can do these sort of, you can call them attacks if you want, where like, okay, I have 2 nodes and I like run a payment to it through one route and like, oh, it actually worked, well, I'll like fail it at the end because I take myself, and sort of try to map out where reliable routes are that way. And I totally understand that like privacy is a super important part, but I feel like maybe some messages where you can sort of ask like, hey, if I wanted to route an HTLC this big right now, like, you do that, and they can sort of like say like yeah or no. Like yes is a privacy leak, but some of those things are already happening, and some of those things are happening in a way that like big companies can map these things out, and like normal users aren't able to, and so like you're getting that sort of centralization there. So like that's something I'm looking at and worried about, and like there's definitely a trade-off of like reliability and privacy, right? And it's unfortunate there's, trade-off. We obviously wanna push that Pareto frontier and get the best of both worlds, but sometimes it's well, maybe you lose a little bit of privacy for your, channels, and maybe some of the nodes in the middle don't care, and they're look, I run payments all day, I try to make money off of it, and I kind of want people to know to some, I don't need to tell them my entire channel balance, but I can just tell them yeah, it's good, you run an HTLC through here, it'll work, or no, I'm a lopsided right now and I can't. That's information that could be really useful to lots of nodes, and right now I feel is available to a small subset of nodes, so that's not great. So looking at that kind of stuff.
Cool. One thing I've worked on in the past maybe 5 or so months is kind of tablet channels of Lightning itself. So maybe it was around last year or so, AJ kind of had very large kind of proposal of tablet channels to basically add triple scripts, bunch of really cool things as well too. But I think we met back in I think it was May, a bunch of developers developer summit. We kind of decided kind of very extreme version of tablet channels and stuff, right? It's gonna start with kind of actually using Music 2 for the funding output basically. So at this point there's one signature versus 2, which is really cool because all of a sudden now a Lightning channel, assuming it's not advertised, it's a regular payment a taproot thing on chain itself. And that's a really cool part of it itself. One thing that's a really key part of that is music itself. And recently Music 1.0 got announced, really cool thing in the ecosystem. Shout out to everyone watching that's working on that in the past. And so now I think for L&D I'm working with Music 1.0, I have that almost done. But as far as I think we'll have music channels, I think probably by the end of the year, I think we'll have interrupt between nodes at least by the end of the year. Some additional things we need to do as far as gossip and things like that, but I think it's really cool. I think one of the really cool things about that is it basically gives you a lot more flexibility as far as key management, right? Because there's something called Frost, basically lets you do kind of a threshold signature that looks like a single signature. So now you basically have one big node, maybe has 3 or 5 different backend nodes that are joining some crazy Byzantine fault tolerant thing to basically make sure the leader is actually correct. So that's really exciting. I think it's also kind of bleed over into other things. For example, a lot of people do things like swaps. So they have a loop, runs a loop and a loop out as well, right? So right now these are pretty kind of identified on chain because they look, it has a different script as well too. But so loops actually are word.taproot swap itself. It's really cool because now they actually look like real transactions on chain, right? Assuming you have all taproot inputs, all taproot outputs, basically you can't necessarily tell that that's a swap going on in the network itself, right? I think the next big thing that leads from that is basically something we call fast PTLCs, because that's probably one of the other kind of large loopholes in Lightning privacy, and that every single node actually has the exact same payment hash across the entire thing, right? Which if you have a node on 2 different paths or 2 different points of the path, it's trivially distinguishable, right? This actually lets us start to randomize that value, which is really cool because all of a sudden now if you add something like PTLC and MVP, it's okay, well, can I really correlate all these payments going back and forth as well? I think it's generally fee savings and privacy, but that can also lead to scalability down the line as well. Because as Tadge mentioned as well, right now it's kind of also difficult to retry a payment at times because maybe you get stuck. There's different ways you can do it. I mean, they call it stuckless in the past. Maybe it's retryable or safe retry payments or something. It's a better name, but you more easily retry that payment basically because now you kind of have better ways to construct a timeline or a hash lock type of scheme using these public keys rather than hash pairs themselves.
Yeah, interject a little bit. So for taproot channels, you can do them today, and you just need gossip because it's a private agreement between 2 parties. For L2, it's the same idea, assuming there's any prep out or something like it. As a consensus change, it's a private channel that we can run through any type of channel, right? So L2 channel could run through a taproot channel. 8 PTLCs, from what I understand, would need to be the whole route. So that's the one constraint there.
Yeah, so PTLCs are going to take longer to roll out because you can't mix it. Well, you can if you did ECDSA and Schnorr together, but so that one that's going to be a much longer time frame because you basically need the entire route to use this new PTLC market, right? I think those basically support both from the beginning and probably bias towards PTLCs because they'll probably be maybe cheaper on chain depending on the way things are constructed because taproot gives you a bunch of additional things on there. I guess the other thing, so the further out that is given by taproot channels also start to use Taro on the Offchain layer. So this is basically letting you once again have something at the edge that's a different asset, maybe it's wherever you want. You can actually use that plug into target itself. And I think we'll talk about that much later. That's another thing.
Yeah,
would be pretty cool.
Let's talk about that for sure. Exactly, coverage on that, and also I don't want to wait till the end for all questions. So if people have something they're burning, so we're going to go through a lot of topics, we can interrupt and ask questions along the way. So anything on that so far before we move on? So one of the questions that came up from people suggested asking here is just this process. We see it on Twitter. There's priorities. Lightning Labs doesn't do this first, or do these things, or whatever it is. I feel like we should talk about some of this process without, stepping on too many toes. But how would you guys, as developers, like to hear from the community what is helpful, what is not helpful. So not a specific thing, like why are we working on this, why are we not? We all have different reasons, we're all adults. But what can we do as companies relying on you guys that would be helpful? Or are there things? So maybe talking more about, I love the fact that there are multiple implementations, that's a good thing. I think everyone should have these priorities, but it's confusing on the outside to see disagreements like this. It's positive, whatever, you know, but I would love to hear people's thoughts, if anyone wants to comment on it.
I think that the important thing to understand about Lightning development today is that we've basically done all the easy things. So the things that remain are most of the things that we're doing now are things that we almost knew how to do 3 years ago and decided that they were important to do, but just require much more work. So since all of those things require a lot of work, we just cannot do everything at once. So you have to somehow find a good way to sort them depending on priorities, and that kind of depends on what you are trying to achieve in the short term. For example, since we also have a wallet, we get a lot of support requests and we see what users on wallet have issues with on Lightning. So that's one of our focus, to ensure that users on wallet have the best experience possible on Lightning, and that guides how we choose to sort priorities. But other people have different priorities depending on what use cases are more important for them in the short term, and that's okay. I think that in the long run we'll all agree on the important things that we have to do. We will just sometimes take more time to get there, but the important thing is to get feedback from our users to know what the pain points are for them. And maybe we're not going to address your pain point right now, but eventually it will be addressed if enough people have that pain point and we find a good solution for it.
Yeah, definitely. Alright, wanna go down that road?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I feel like in a lot of cases, there's kind of ways to like compromise and basically implement something, but implement it in a way where it works like well enough, even if you haven't made every last privacy optimization. And in that way, you can kind of get features in even when they're not like the most top priority. And yeah, I feel like Bolt 12 has been kind of a good example of this, because like, yeah, it's a huge priority for LDK, C Lightning, but maybe not so if you're focused on Taro and stuff, and that can totally make sense. But some of the compromises have been like, Carla's been working on onion messages in LND, and one of the things is you can just skip doing the forwarding part of onion messages and just always direct connect to the recipient. And there's just a lot of stuff like that where you can kind of get it working in a way where you get all the UX benefits, but put off a lot of the hard stuff till later and still kind of have everyone on the network be able to like kumbaya together, so.
I don't have a lot to say about the spec, because I'm kind of, I haven't been involved because I'm just off my own la la land, like probably Tadge a little bit, but I guess I can shift to more like looking at what people actually want. So to your point, talking to users, I think someone like Christian Becker who's been working hard on Greenlight is going to have much more to say on that, right? Because exposing, self-custody node infrastructure to users in a scalable way would be really interesting to see where that goes. For my purpose, I guess you'd say, I'm giving a talk on Saturday, and if I say things and it's not what people want, I want people to say that. If it's what you want, tell me that, right? And I have like the caveats, pluses and minuses. If it's just not interesting to people, I'll stop working on it, right? But it's just, you need people to kind of yell at you, say like, firm disagreements or agreements, right?
I'm not as directly involved in the process of arguing these features. It might be pretty soon, but I think what's good to keep in mind, and it's like kind of the nice part of this, is like it's not really a consensus system, and so you can have different feature sets. You can have there's no direct homomorphism between layer 1 and soft forks and like layer 2 and message compatibility. Like they're not quite the same thing, but you can have totally different feature sets and different messages and compatibilities, and it sort of still works, and you can kind of negotiate the lowest common denominator. Like there was a recent part where like a couple days ago, like different nodes sort of didn't talk to each other anymore, and it like wasn't actually that bad. Whereas if that had been like layer 1, that would have been much more serious. So I think that's what lets I don't know if it's like there's more Lightning developers than like layer 1 core developers now. It sort of sometimes feels that way, and I think part of it is it's not low stakes, it's obviously very high stakes, it's like people's money, writing software with other people's money, it's really scary. But also, it's like not quite as scary as consensus layer 1 stuff.
Yeah. So there's this, when you're negotiating features, it's okay to be odd, right? So if it's an odd number feature, it's okay to be odd. We do our own thing, right? You don't have to disconnect from anywhere.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point about kind of like, exactly like what is LM itself, right? Like, so right now you can say, okay, well, it's kind of like the SHA-2, conditional HLC premium basically, right? So as long as that's there, then like, to me, you basically have network, right? And like, there's kind of a link layer, okay, maybe someone can do the fronting protocol, maybe they have an error message, maybe they give them on the side basically. I think the cool thing about the Lightning protocol is like, it's super, super extensible, right? You can add new feature bits, you can add new messages, you can add new optional types of messages basically. I think all that stuff is handled relatively gracefully as well too. So, and I think, I would say, I think it's kind of like a good problem that like there's so much stuff people have thought of that's actually compelling basically, we're having a hard time choosing between them, right? But I think that's okay as well because eventually nodes can be, say, specialized. They can be the node for mobile, they can be the node for big server installation, whatever else, right? So I think it's kind of like hard to like have the node, do basically everything. We've tried that at times, but I think we're kind of focusing in the area sometimes. But as far as like feedback, I say we probably spend most of our time like laptops like other companies basically, right? So we have a thing happens like every quarter, so we just get together like a bunch of companies running LME and say, hey, what's great and what sucks basically, right? We get a bunch of feedback from that, and then typically that goes into like our own planning and also spec stuff other times as well. So I think it's a good problem to have that there's so much additional things. I think it's hard to expect every implementation to keep up with every single thing basically, just because like I don't know about y'all, but we have a lot of code. I'm getting allergic to code as I get older, I feel, right? So if I can like minimize that stuff, and I think genuinely can trend, like I think for example, people like see that we're kind of on the initial direction this and just start to basically allow things to basically be built on kind of the node implementation itself, right? So maybe the node doesn't need to basically do every single thing, but can give you enough hooks and APIs to do things outside of it, right? And that's a lot better because okay, maybe something can evolve on the side that's really, really popular, we'll pull it into the main thing itself. Because I think it's hard, particularly for like maintainers, to say, okay, well, we have 200 PRs, all these different contributors, and there's like 5 inspect things basically. Like, people want to do all this additional stuff. It's like, well, can you do it outside for a little bit? Okay, let's pull it back in. So I think I need a lot more flexibility basically, making sure that you can basically be like a platform both for business and also the protocol itself. And that's something I can work on at ourselves.
Perfect. Questions or comments on that section or anything else? Alright, switching to defense a little bit. Biggest concerns that you have currently for Lightning, and feel free to speak to any projects to address those concerns. Talking channel jamming, all that good stuff.
Okay, so I'd say that mine is mempool policies and the issues around RBF. We're just lucky that the mempool has been somewhat empty for a while and blocks are not full and it's easy to get transactions in. But a few years ago we spent 3 or 4 months with a consistent high fee rate, and that kind of broke Lightning. So we need to make sure that it doesn't break Lightning the next time it happens. So I'm really thrilled to see that package relay and changes related to package relay are making progress in Bitcoin, because that's something that we cannot fix only at the Lightning layer. We need changes to the policies at the Bitcoin layer. So it's really great to have that much collaboration between the 2 layers, and I'm excited to see that progress.
Yeah, the mempool pinning is definitely terrifying stuff. I feel like there's been a ton of progress made by Gloria, so that's kind of looking good. I feel like I would pick channel jamming just because I haven't really heard yet. I've heard all these like prepayment things, like that sounds so icky, and I don't really know where that's gonna go yet. But yeah, there's definitely no shortage of also like DOS and like privacy de-anonymization attacks as well. So like take your pick, I guess.
Prepayment, can you expand on that? I actually haven't heard the term.
Well, I'm not really into details of this, but like in discussing channel jamming, I know that people are talking about ways where you basically pay ahead of time before making a payment, and somehow that will kind of make it too expensive to channel jam, or do you know more about this?
Yeah, that was my proposal, and I don't like it. I just put it out there because that's the obvious way to fix it.
I think she just called you icky, by the way.
I would say the same. So yeah, channel jamming is the issue that people can just route HLCs through you that they will just fail at the end, or that they can hold for a while, and channels have a limited number of HLCs that they can hold at a time. So this is an issue because people can use that to kind of block your channels, but there are no known good solutions that fix that without impacting honest users as well. And the easiest way to kind of somewhat address this is to say, whenever you send an HLC, even if it fails, you pay a small amount. But that's really bad, because how much you would have to pay to not not create a bad UX for honest users that have payments that fail while these are honest payments, while deterring attackers enough. It's hard to find the right value. So I really don't like that proposal, even though I made it. But there's no perfect solution yet, and it's still ongoing research. But there's active research going on in there.
That's one question. Is this a liveliness issue or a safety issue?
It's a liveness issue mostly, but it could transform into a safety issue if you start closing a lot of channels and trying to get a lot of HTLCs back on chain and the blocks are full. But it's mostly a liveness issue.
Yeah, I think one thing, or at least my standpoint of trying to is like, I think it's kind of like difficult to like properly parameterize things to basically this is incentivized for like an attacker, right? So, okay, well, how high prepages do that actually need to be basically? Like also what if the attacker is like, super like wealthy basically, they just want to see everything burn, right? So one thing I looked at in the past basically, okay, like how do you make sure things can actually degrade gracefully basically, right? So maybe it's something where you can attach like metadata for like certain things or something like that. So okay, well now at least I know people that like routed me 2 weeks ago, I can do that. So I think one other thing that like I think everyone that's fortunate obviously having multiple channels with 2 different nodes, right? So at this point I advertise maybe 20% of my actual bandwidth, right? And maybe at this point you don't exactly know how much I'm being jammed, or maybe now I have this kind of like sort of like overflow capacity on the side, right? So it seems difficult, it seems kind of like inherent to the HTLC, right? And the time lock is what makes everything secure every day because I can time out. So it's kind of like difficult, and you can say that maybe the already kind of like has like a sort of like cost in terms of like an ephemeral bond, right? Maybe we can do things like scale the actual HTLC amount or the fee according to the CLTV itself. Now, because it's okay, well that's ephemeral bond, but it's kind of like a thing where there's no easy solution. So I think it's kind of like a mitigation from different angles, perhaps, and a better learning monitoring, things like that.
Okay, so for me, I wouldn't say mempool because it's a safety issue. Channel units goes for liveliness, but shoot, what was I going to say? Let's see.
It's a good way of breaking it down though.
Rephrase the question again, maybe.
Just talking about defense and what's the most important project on your list for defense.
I'm really blanking. Pass.
Your offense kind of guy, that's all right.
Mempool first, and then I can't remember now.
Yeah, I definitely agree, like, the fact that there's no persistent fee market and the mempool, like it's scary because it works fine right now and you like know it probably won't later. The thing I worry about, I guess, is like totally different thing, which is like redefinition of Lightning, which we see in Bitcoin, you worry about in Bitcoin, right? If you open an incognito window or like Bitcoin wallet, you search on like the App Store or whatever, like you're gonna get custodial wallets. But I feel like it's maybe even more dangerous in Lightning where, I may have visited a certain Central American country in the last year and like they're very into Lightning, but you look and you're like, this isn't, where's the channel out point, like where are the HTLCs, like there's no, and so it does seem like there's a lot of people I've talked to who are like, yeah, I'm using Lightning, and like there's, whatever they're using may connect to something that eventually uses Lightning, but like they don't have any keys. They don't have
a channel or something.
Yeah, there's no way to close channels. And to me, like the important part of Lightning is like, yeah, when everything's working great, it's fast, it's cheap, but you always have this like, I've got this like self-destruct button that like blows everything up and all of my money falls back on chain and that's it. And there's a lot of stuff that just ignores that, and it's really hard because like you shouldn't ever have to press that, but you really need that button, and so that's scary.
So you remember? Yeah. So part of that is my second thing I was thinking is keeping things as simple as possible when it comes to safety. So basically, like as an implementer of a spec, like the default spec, there's a lot of complexity involved, and there's an asymmetrical state, a lot of things going on, and part of my work is saying like, here's an alternative, a little simpler in X, Y, and Z ways, and then is this a good trade-off? Yes or no? And this is like a question.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. So I was thinking myself as far as kind of like parsing, and I think we have a lot of code, so I think I kind of worry about like, aside from like mempool and things like that, just making sure things are actually secure, right? Because there's a lot of layers now. The Lightning node does a lot of stuff, right? Like, invoices, HTLCs, any amount of potential things as well too. So I kind of worry about like, as we add more and more stuff, how do you kind of wrangle that complexity, basically make sure that we either have like, safe failure modes, we have that redundancy for different nodes, and so, then we had that like, issue that happened, earlier, basically on Sunday earlier this week, and think about now is like how can we add like, can we have like multiple backends that we can actually check to make sure things are moving forward? Can we have additional sources? Could we, for example, like we have anything today where we're actually, it's not spec yet, but like LD does it, we're basically we send the block header and a ping message basically, right? So could we use that basically to say, okay, well, the chain is still going, this is my block, let me get it from someone else. So kind of like just adding more redundancy basically to just make sure things fail properly and gracefully rather than like things blowing up basically. Because I think now, how you're saying, like, you're running software, you're running money with, software Google's money, now we're getting bigger and bigger, right? I think there's $100 million, on Lightning now, like 5K BTC
public, yeah.
Yeah, public, yeah, exactly, public 5K BTC or so, and like, other things, feel likely, like the Tadge had that button on Sunday, but like, the network didn't really shut down because of it, right? Things were still forwarded, things were going well, so if you were kind of a very savvy operator, you had like good monitoring, you're like, oh, something's off here, then you went to database. But for the most part, you could say users didn't actually know, so that's basically the best case scenario for like a graceful failover, versus how much servicing up like a big error, like a big, like red warning, but to users, so that's something I think about as well, as far as like, risk, minimizing risk in the traditional one, but making sure things can be, secure and basically fail in a graceful manner without anything just going down at once, so.
Yep. Agreed. Do you want to add one thing
Yeah,
before
I'd
we move
like to
on?
add
We got about 10 minutes left, so.
Okay, another one that's important is the security of your keys, because Lightning is a hot wallet, and most people just don't realize that when they're using a wallet. With on-chain Bitcoin, it's somewhat easy. You can have a security element, a hardware wallet, and you can just put everything on the hardware wallet, and you're much safer than if you had keys directly on a laptop or on a mobile phone. But for Lightning, it's much harder to put things in a hardware wallet while ensuring that the hardware wallet doesn't just become a blindsider. So it's really challenging, especially for big nodes that route a lot of payments, but also do swaps, peer swap things, splicing, channel opens, and this is a very active area of research, but it's really hard to fix.
Moving on to the next topic. What's that?
I was gonna say, like, the thing I mentioned about Frost can make it a little easier, because you can actually like have different signers now.
Yeah, I want to actually end, if it's okay, can we end on the multi-sig conversation? I think that would be of interest to a lot of people, that'd be great. You want to do that? Okay,
sure.
But before we get there, one opinion too on LSPs. How do you guys see the Lightning Network without diving into specific features, kind of the way it's developing, the way it's being used? Say, El Salvador is doing something that they're calling Lightning. When does an LSP become an intranet and not Lightning? You have Fedimint with the mints and then using Lightning on the side. The topography is becoming so varied, I'm having trouble keeping up. But how do you guys just sort of feel about how that's going? How do you look at that? Maybe that's a little squishy of a topic, but that'd be great to hear.
It's a great topic because we actually don't know exactly the way it's gonna go, because there's always a trade-off between how much you're willing to pay for features and for privacy, and LSPs are
Lightning service providers, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Lightning service providers are middle ground where you pay probably a bit less because these LSPs provide services, but you also lose a bit of privacy potentially. So it really depends. There's a wide array. There's a whole spectrum of use cases depending on what users want to achieve. So do they want to achieve payments that go fast and cost just a few sats, or do they want perfect privacy and are they ready to pay more for it? So we don't know exactly how many of the users fall into the category that want an LSP, what kind of services they want, how deep do they want to go, and it's important to allow people to experiment and just have many different LSPs, many different wallets that provide different trade-offs and see what users want and build the right UX depending on that. And we just don't know right now. And the goal of LSPs is to ensure that people don't all end up on custodial wallets and things that are not Lightning at all. It's to find a good middle ground that achieves trade-offs.
I would love to hear from Tadge from the early days of white paper. Now, how do you, did you see LSP? Did you imagine the directions?
There's a lot of things that can be, trusted, but it's like sort of okay. Where if you're like, hey, pay for inbound liquidity or pay for some kind of SLA, or like I sort of initially thought like exchanges would do this. I guess it was sort of right after Mt. Gox. And so I thought everyone is going to be terrified of exchanges, and exchanges can sort of say, hey, open channels with us, and then you don't have to worry if we get hacked or insolvent, because like your money's in a channel, you just like trade in this channel. And that would sort of be the natural first LSP to like route between users of an exchange or something. Like that didn't really happen at all. We're seeing exchanges use it now, but like I thought that would happen like first, not like sort of last. But yeah, to me the main difference is big. It's like if you have this eject button where you're like, okay, I've got my keys, I can push the button and leave, then like sure, the LSP can sort of do whatever. It's like not a big deal.
We're out of time, so we gotta switch to the Q&A, but just in the 5 seconds, I think this is an important maybe visual that we're all saying in different ways, but the longer Lightning exists, the more channels, the more money goes into it. You have all these years to pack people into the theater, but the exit door is the same size. It doesn't get any bigger. So we have an infinitely expanding theater with one doorway. Is that just to spook you out.
That's a good problem to have, in my opinion.
That's a good,
Lobster, we need more fees.
Yeah, we do need fees.
And like,
I think we just need bigger
It's a
blocks
champagne
for all of
problem.
that.
well, yeah, that's another
sure.
point. One thing I want to say is like, I feel like I think it's easy like in Bitcoin to like put people into UTX. So you can say the rolling up is easy. The unrolling is the hard part basically. How do you do that in a way that doesn't cause like mass congestion or also cause you to basically have some confidence flow in your own state? I think that's probably like a layer one thing as far as like getting better toolings, tools and primitives to do that stuff.
Okay, sorry, Q&A. It's a quiet crowd without the questions, we must speak. Alright, Michael, go ahead, you got it.
Hey, I know this is the Offchain panel, but just to kind of highlight on that point, just so you can plan to see what are you guys excited about in terms of things that can maybe help with that, idea of, I love the analogy by the way, Paul, where the leader is getting bigger, but the exit is still the same size. Just because you ended with it, and I think that's a kind of interesting topic, what are you guys excited about, or what do you think is coming down the pipe in terms to address some of that? And all of you were mentioning, you think this is more or less a layer one kind of solution to be had, so I'd like to hear some ideas there.
Yeah, for me, I'd say it's like, covenant, or I guess we ran into transaction introspection. This is the new PC, we're going to talk about covenant or something. But like, I think that would basically allow you to like, create like you can say some sort of like audible kind of like state making basically that makes that withdrawal or like unroll enterprise a lot easier, right? Because right now it's kind of like a state where like people need to be like tracking all of these different states. Basically, maybe even different combination of the individuals exiting from those states. But if we have a way to say, okay, well, I have like a signature on like my balance and a root tree hash, something like that, right? Can I submit that to this contract that then says, okay, well, this is the tree hash itself. Let's do a check on the stack, something like that. Let's manipulate the stack, basically things like that. So I think like that's the direction that's like most promising. I think in order to allow people to like unroll effectively, and unrolling basically needs, you can say, better introspection, at that level. It's basically look at the environment also make sure that you basically have the correct balance, right? Without me having to store a bunch of state or update my state basically comes on exits as well. There's a bunch of research in this as well, but I think this direction, as far as like probably one of the biggest things I think on the table right now for like Bitcoin consensus itself. I think I'm really excited about like application developer or content developer, on Bitcoin itself. So
Yeah, I think for people who aren't like super familiar and like looking at all the different covenant and stuff, and like Zcash and Preva and all these things, it's in a weird state where like you might think like, oh, there's not that much going on in Bitcoin, but actually there's like really cool things you can do with the different Zcash things and different covenants, opcodes and things like that. And it's not that like we're looking for like something useful, it's that like OpCTV, I'm speaking for myself, but like OpCTV is really cool, and I think one of the objections some people have is like, it's really cool, but it feels so close to something even cooler that like we shouldn't put it in yet, because like we're figuring out new things, and it's really hard to put new stuff in. And so it's like this weird state we're in where like, there's all these really cool things. You can have like L2 and like tradable discrete log contracts and like OpCTV and these PLCs and does all this cool stuff. But like we don't really have any of it because we keep finding new cooler things. So if we like stop finding cooler things for a year or two, then maybe we can agree on something together.
Yeah, so
stop working. Stop thinking new shit.
There's some history of mask as a concept, or abstract syntax trees kind of got bite-shaped. It's like, there's all these ways of doing it, right? It's like 3, 4, 5 ways, I remember. And eventually it like got packaged up in one way on Taproot, the subset of it, right? But it's just when the design space is large, it slows things down.
If we don't have other questions, I think we have time to talk about 1 or 2 more topics. I'd love to cover mobile node lightning. If you could talk about that a little bit about, that'd be great.
Yeah, that totally plays back into the LSP thing, which I feel like is going to make the mobile UX so much easier, because your LSP can basically be your watchtower, your trampoline node, so that you don't have to process all the network graph, and you can save on all that bandwidth. And yeah, just making sure that your channel is balanced as well, I think is going to be key for the LSP thing. Yeah, in terms of choosing LSPs, I'm not sure if that's determined how that's going to be done in a decentralized way, like maybe liquidity ads are going to play a role in that, so that's kind of an open question. But yeah, I feel like async payments is going to be huge for that. And yeah, because right now people are kind of playing with, oh, if you send a notification on iOS, maybe you get like 1/2 millisecond of CPU time, and you can kind of process it. It's kind of not really working, and it's not really reliable. So yeah, that's mostly what I'm excited for. Although it does depend on PTLCs as well.
Oh, I gotta understand that better, but it's probably more in depth than we can go. But how do you feel about, and we can start with you, but these different channel flavors happening? So I'm not up to speed on all of them. I saw Andre's talk this morning about hosted channels, and there's different names for things. Do you wanna kick in some opinions about the new flavors?
Yeah, I think hosted channels are a cool concept. I feel like I have definitely mostly been focused on the non-custodial mobile, so end users would be having their own channels. I'm not sure if there's questions about kind of if it's like semi-custodial to have a hosted channel, even if you're the one that has the private keys or exactly how that works. But yeah, I think it's a great like bed for experimentation, and if something has like a great UX and it turns out to work on the custodial end, then I'm all for it. That sounds great. As long as we can get the payments to be more reliable than they are today as well, and solve all those UX issues and still be doing it in a private way, then great. So.
Any takes on that, Greg, on the channel front, or defense?
Can you define hosted channel specifically?
Isn't that just where someone else is running your node basically, and they have the channels for you, but you have the private keys, or maybe they have the private keys in some cases.
I think they're two very different beasts depending on how you do it. So if you have a verified lightning signer, it might be much more palatable than just a key, because you don't have any, it's not state. I don't have any expert opinion on that, but it seems a little different.
Well, yeah, like I think the basic version of it, like kind of like you have in a single channel, you basically like virtualize kind of like the users onto that channel itself, right? And the users can basically kind of like submit to you like and you basically say they're not, you don't necessarily know what they're making payments to, but you're not necessarily in that multi-sig. Maybe you can have like a receipt perhaps you can do that. So it lets you kind of like have like a protocol level account abstraction over channels, the way that maybe you just runability within itself. But as far as like that, I think it's great because I think at least myself, I got to be part of this whole thing back then called bridgeless innovation. Basically, as far as just doing stuff and saying does it work out. Ideally, they were kind of expressing security models in a very guarded way, letting people know what's going on there. But I'd say for me, I think the most important thing is to make sure like the actual backbone of the network is secure and like works well and everything like that. Because you can't really control what people are doing at the edges. Hopefully, it doesn't blow up and get too big. But also, if it's at the edges, it's not going to be a contagion to take down the entire network or something like that. So that's kind of like how I view it about general.
Greg, about leading with multi-sig matching, you wanna chat about that for a second?
Not really, I have no thoughts on it.
None? I thought that was sorry.
Okay, so multi-sig means,
Dodging bullet.
multi-sig means are, just off the top of my head, would be up channel updates will be maybe a little slower, because you're gonna have internal round trips as well as external. So you have 1.5 round trips to HLC forward today, with L2 you have half round trip. But so kind of internal latency as well, so maybe you won't be as a desirable routing partner, perhaps. You also have increased state, perhaps, with like Frost. They have key generation ceremony rather than music where you're just combining all the keys you bring to the table. And music even you have state, so there's all these complexities and trade-offs you have to look at.
Yeah, an issue with multi-signature is that it may give you a false sense of security. It doesn't actually, people think that it protects against someone who would breach your node machine so that they wouldn't be able to steal your keys. Yes, they're not able to steal your keys, but if they are on your machine, they can just generate requests to sign things, and that has the same effect. They can easily steal funds with just that, even if you split your keys among many. And the hard part is that the signers, to protect against that, the signers need to have a lot of information about the state of your channels, and eventually, once you start pulling on that thread, you realize that the signer is actually all of the lightning nodes, basically. They almost have to have all of the lightning nodes state, so this is really hard, and I don't want people to think that they are fully secure because they are using multi-sigs, because they're not. It's much better than having only a single key on the same machine, but it's not bulletproof, basically.
I think the VLS project is working on that, but they've been working with LDK, and it is true that they've kind of slowly been pulling more and more like state, like, oh, now we're tracking all the pre-images, and just, yeah, it kind of gets big quickly.
Let's get rid of the pre-image state.
That's a great comeback, so L2, get rid of pre-image. Yeah, that's a great point. Any questions from the crowd on that?
Well, if you go to the lightning node's problem with hats, or you just sort of like we were talking about before, like how you would like to see it distributed, and not what the lightning node should be, what should be separated.
You said hats?
2 minutes. Yeah, it's a blog post that just was called "The Problem with Hats." So it's a new technical term. Yeah, I can touch on that for a sec. Just most larger, we're all in a state now where the technical founders generally have access to the servers, so it's not a concern if you run your node with the private keys on there and we're all a happy family and no one's walking away with the money. But in every business, that would be, not compliant with any sort of accounting standards where the same person with the keys to the machine have the same keys to the bank account, so that would be sort of insane. So Lightning, the power of it is you have the ability to interact and pay, and you're your own bank, but it's having a side effect of creating a new combined role within companies. So we're not really equipped to deal with that as organizations are structured today. So that can be addressed with something like the Validated Lightning Signer project. We have to start with at least making it a little harder. And then you have policies, and then it's up to the organization to decide how much of that threat, because you could literally see the whole thing going all the way over. What if they cheat the graph? What if the graph is wrong? I mean, you could eclipse attack your signer at many different levels. But the way it is today, I can't see how a company would run their own Lightning nodes and be SOC 2 compliant or anything. I mean, it would just be a non-starter. So anyway, sorry. That was what we were trying to raise as a company. And I think the work being done by people on this panel is making a huge difference for making all this possible. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to the conference organizers, by the way. And as a company representing really a Lightning,